Hello everyone, this will be my review of the GTX 970 from Gigabyte. Before starting, I just want to say that I've had this graphics card since October from last year and I'm very happy and satisfied with it. In this video I will be going over the look of the card, measurements and the inputs/outputs, the power consumption, the technical specs, benchmarks, and I will be giving my opinion on the VRAM design flaw and just giving out some final thoughts. So starting off, I will be telling a little bit about the aesthetics and inputs/outputs of the graphics card. As you can see here, it has 3 fans and goes with Gigabyte's open air reinforced design. Whether or not the GPU looks cool is totally subjective. I personally like the look though. The graphics card is 310mm long, 129mm wide and 43mm high, so make sure that it fits in your case before pressing that buy button. And on the back of the card we got a DVI-I output, a DVI-D output, a HDMI 2.0 output and 3 DisplayPort outputs, so there's a good selection of ports to use. The GPU is being powered by an 8-pin connector and a 6-pin connector. A power supply of 550 watts is required/recommended by Gigabyte themselves. The GTX 970 consumes 120 watts while idle and 280 watts while being under full stress. I found the info on the power consumption on guru3d.com and a link to the article will be in the description. I myself have a RM750 from Corsair, which is a 750 watt power supply, and I haven't had any problems with not getting enough power to the GPU, so most people should be fine as well. The GTX 970 is a 28nm GPU with 1664 CUDA cores. The boost clock, the base clock is on 1114 MHz and the boost clock is on 1253 MHz. And the card's memory is on 4 GB with a 256-bit memory bus. And the GTX 970 will be fully supporting DX12 once it releases. Now we are getting into the benchmarks. In Parcel Storm 64 players Conquest in Battlefield 4 at the highest settings possible in 1080p, with the resolution scale set to 100, we are getting 69 frames per second minimum, 100 frames per second average, and 149 frames per second maximum. And by the way, to just make everything clear, I ran all games in 1080p and had the VSync disabled. Getting into running over Hookers Simulator aka GTA 5 story mode, we are getting 23 FPS minimum, 43 FPS average and 257 FPS maximum at the highest settings possible. But I haven't really touched the advanced graphics settings yet. I just left it at default because I felt like it was necessary to change that up. But still, the game looks absolutely gorgeous at these settings. And although I don't play at the high settings myself personally, that's because I prefer a frame rate of above at least 60 FPS over visual quality. But honestly, I like a nice mix or a balance between the two. In Far Cry 4 we are getting 26 FPS minimum, 55 FPS average and 148 FPS maximum, also the highest settings. What I like to say though is that games usually don't drop or play at their minimum FPS really, and I believe this could be caused by something like stuff loading in the background for the game. But this doesn't really matter anyway, as the game mostly stayed over 60 FPS most of the time anyway, and everything was silky smooth, so playing on the high settings in Far Cry 4 gets a green light by me. CSGO is getting absolutely wrecked by 970. I played some arms race and I got 135 FPS minimum, 144 FPS average and 148 FPS maximum on the highest settings. Now, I have seen our benchmarks of the 970 on CSGO getting even higher frame rates than this, but I believe mine are lower because I either benchmarked at higher settings than the other people, or because I played arms race with more players, which could take away a few more frames. Arma 3 is getting 7 FPS minimum, 38 FPS average and 72 FPS maximum on the highest settings. I benchmarked while playing the first scenario, and sadly I don't remember actually what it was called, so I'm apologizing for that. And DayZ will be the last game that I've benchmarked, and in DayZ standalone I got 6 FPS minimum, 37 FPS average and 276 FPS maximum. I was a big enough dumbass that I actually forgot to switch to the highest settings possible here, and I'm a lazy person, so I didn't really want to benchmark the game again, but it's okay because here's what I want to tell you about the game DayZ. The rendering engine of the game sucks big time. So here's just an example. Let's say you're in Cherno, as I were the entire time while benchmarking. You'll get like maybe 20 FPS, just as an example, or even lower than that. And if you're later on in the game, let's say, somewhere unknown on the map in the woods and staring at the ground, you can get to above 200 FPS, which is absolutely sick. So this only shows that the game isn't really well optimized at all, and the game isn't really worth benchmarking either, but I decided to just put it in here just because the game is growing in popularity. And a thing to mention though is that the game still is in alpha, so it's not a finished product, and the developers are working on a new rendering engine, so this should be fixed in the future. And now I would like to talk about the VRAM design flaw of the GTX 970. There has been this thing going around that the 970 only has 3.5 gigabytes of memory available and not 4 gigabytes as it is marketed. And this is kind of true, because it does in fact have 4 gigabytes of memory, but the last 500 megabytes are actually slower than the first 3.5 gigabytes. So yes, you basically only have about 3.5 gigabytes of GDDR5 to use. But the question is, does it really affect your gaming? And I would say absolutely not. Especially if you're playing in 1080p or even lower, this shouldn't be an issue. And you would only be experiencing issues with having only 3.5 gigabytes of memory available, and this would be if you're going for the higher resolutions, such as 4K with, let's say, the highest settings possible. But this GPU isn't really made for 4K at high settings anyway. Like, you could probably play in 4K with this, but the frame rate would be straight out shit. But if you are planning to buy one and then buy another 970 in the future to play in, let's say, 4K, DX12 should allow you to double the VRAM in SLI mode anyway, and get you 7 gigabytes of VRAM, which will in fact be enough for 4K. So I wouldn't really worry too much personally. But at the end of the day, would I recommend the GTX 970? And the answer to that is a big yes, because the GPU is performing really well and doesn't kill the bank either, so that's a big plus. And if you are planning to buy a GTX 980 instead of this one, I'm telling you right now, in most cases it isn't worth it, especially as you could pay just a little bit more cash and get two 970s over a 980 and just put them in SLI for a much better performance anyway. So that's what I would do instead of getting a single 980. And before ending this video, I just want to give you all a big thank you for watching, and if you liked the video and want to see more, then a like and subscribe would be really helpful.